I don't know if you believe in like the universe speaking to you. On my way up there, I totaled a car.
Hey, welcome back, investor, to another episode of Passive Income Adventures. Today we got Pat Pascal Zangarella. We're just gonna thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I should think, yeah, you did better than most. So
Before we started, you said I'm probably your perfect guest because your story really mirrors a lot of what we talk about on the show. We talk about entrepreneurship, about how to run a business so you can make more money, so you can invest more money, so you can live that passive income lifestyle. And I also talk a lot about protecting ourselves from bad investments like fraud and scams. We talk about that a lot, but also talking about just losing money on deals. And you have an amazing recovery story, and that kind of leads into your origin story of the business that you run, the real estate business that you run. So can you dive in and tell us more about your background, your history, how you kind of came to this unconventional path that you're walking, how you found this world, and how you started your business, and just kind of give us a little bit of those pivot points that directed you down a little bit of a different path.
yeah, sure thing. To start, I was the corporate America sales guy, which I was listening to your podcast with Troy your most recent one. He was in the IT world. I guarantee you he's heard of the company that I worked for. I worked for a company called Gartner for about 6 years, and I was in corporate sales. And you're in that mindset and you start learning about investing. And during my prospecting and scrubbings, I'm listening to Bigger Pockets, you're reading all the books, and you start to recognize that there's this huge world out there that I'm not a part of. And throughout my time in corporate America, as I mentioned, I was in sales. So my income was always a salary plus a commission. And the
Mhm.
way that's pitched to you is okay, you make X on target earnings. And I remember being in a meeting getting a 15K raise. And that was like the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I went from 75 to 90 when in reality it was not a guaranteed increase. It was my on target earnings. If I sold more, I would earn more. And at the same time, I start getting into more of these communities and more of these. Like I started mastermind coaching. I started joining like networking clubs, like being part of something like your Rise group. And you start hearing these individuals that are making 15K a day, a week, a month. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I've got this unguaranteed earning potential that I'm just gassed up that I just got. And other people who are living the life that I want are achieving that in like single phone calls. And so I started dipping my toes into investing. I actually started out with a fourplex. And a little bit about me, I am your typical, like, I'm excitable. Like, I am excitable. You could gas me up with anything you're selling, and I'll likely buy it. Like, I am not the analytical guy. It is something I'm working on. But like every investment that I made had come from a relationship, right? I really didn't turn on the sales and marketing and evaluation aspect until later on. And so my first property was a fourplex down in North Fort Myers, Southwest Florida. And I met the individual in my realtor class. And so it was like the world was speaking to me. I told this guy what I was looking for. He introduced it to me. We went under contract. Everything looked good on paper. And then I realized I didn't know how to read an inspection report. And I realized that after I sent in all my money, sold my stock purchase plans to purchase the property, was like 2 grand left in my bank account. And then my insurance company told me they wouldn't insure me unless I replaced the roof.
Oh
And so I
boy.
was like, oh boy, that's what a soft spot on the roof means. And so learn through that process. And then I would say I spent about 2 years evaluating properties. And after that 2 years happened, finally got under contract, felt like I was on top of the world. And 3 months later, COVID happened. And none of my tenants were paying. I had no cash. I was in a state of panic every single day. And so that was like an intense learning process, like thrown to the wolves. The most impossible thing happened at once. And what was wild about that process, and I sort of like learned the psychology of the landlord I wanted to be, because that was definitely a C class property, probably C flirting with D. And everything looked so good on paper, but I didn't recognize some of the qualitative pieces I was buying and, how to evaluate property managers, right? I picked up a property manager that was almost like local famous, and we had a unit that was difficult to rent and they had to hit on their credit score. And my property manager was like, oh, I would rent to these guys. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. First payment, not paying. Right. So it was like recognizing, hey, maybe we should kind of listen to our intuition a little bit more and what we've learned. So from there, I spent about, I think, another year in my role at work. I was still prospecting, still listening to podcasts. And then I met an individual who was quickly becoming a personality in multiple communities. super big time, was the king of what he was doing, was disrupting the way he was acquiring and selling and wholesaling and flipping properties, was the same age as me. So I was like, I got to get around this guy. I got to learn how he's doing the things. And I actually started, I did the typical, hey, I will help you for free if you mentor me. And so while we were working from home during COVID, I was prospecting for this individual, like slamming the phones, almost like proving my worth, getting taken under his wing. And eventually that led to a deeper relationship where I left my job to go move across the country to work for this individual, left my fiance behind, left the property under management, and took, I think it was like a 75% pay cut to go there. This was just, I mean, I was making, I think 800 a week on a 3 month like contract to say, "Hey, will this work out long term?" And I thought it was like the best thing that had ever happened. I mean, this was it. I'm gonna do it. I'm connecting myself to the right person. And I don't know if you believe in like the universe speaking to you. On my way up there, I totaled a car. Oh, so right before I left, the night before I left, my car broke down. I was supposed to drive it across country the next day. Completely broke down, unfixable. Got in a rental car, switched over all of my luggage on the way up there, hit a deer, totaled the rental car that I was driving. I was about 2 hours from my hotel on the first night. The next morning, wake up, and in my mind, I'm like, "This is adversity. I'm pushing through this. We're gonna make it." And so the next morning, get a new rental car. I had to stay in a hotel overnight, and it was in the middle of nowhere to the point where the police officer that picked me up told me we were 60 miles away from the closest Walmart. And so I get in the new rental car. On the second leg, my property manager calls me up and says, "We don't wanna manage this anymore. You have to take it back." I was like, "What in the world is happening right now?" And so I finally get there. I'm on the phone with my fiance. I'm like, well, I don't know what's going on. We've got to push. And I had a mindset coach at the time. I'm calling him up on a Saturday, freaking out. And so I finally get there and I'm like, okay, we're settled. We're doing this. And during the first month in which I worked there, I was pretty much doing what I was doing remotely. And in the next 2 weeks, I'll just say insane things happen. Okay. Really insane things happen that I wasn't okay with, that I recognized, saw behind the curtain, and I was like, "We gotta go." Right? I had done a deal with this individual before I went out there. Very, very different structure than is publicly available. But at that time, I realized it was awful for me, right? I was in this situation. I just left my job of 6 years where I had reputation. I had great income. I had great benefits and took the leap and it crumbled. I was in this deal I couldn't get out of that would absolutely bury me if it could. And so I was kind of faced with this threshold of what do I do? I have no money. I have my I'm away from my family. And I'm making almost nothing. So on my journey back, it's actually kind of crazy. On my journey back, my coach was like, "Hey, we actually need someone in sales." And in my mind, I was like, "Well, I don't know if I want to do this. I want to actually build something for myself." And my coach hired me as like a sales rep. And that actually became like the coolest thing I'd ever experienced in my life because it was a mindset coach geared towards real estate investors. And when you think about the definition of financial freedom, it completely changed everything I had ever thought about. For example, like I remember talking to an individual who I asked really two critical questions on every call. Number one is, what is your goal? And then number two, what is something you think would be impossible that if you achieved it, it would be amazing, right? Expand the way that people are thinking. And so I talked to an individual, wasn't a syndicator, wasn't a fund manager, on their own, owned like 1,200 units. I mean, on his own, his net worth, I can't even imagine. I wish I could remember who the guy was. And on my first conversation, my first question now is, what's your goal for the end of the year? I want to bring on 400 more units before the end of the year. Fantastic. Well, what's your impossible goal? I want to turn my phone off for 2 weeks. And I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, this guy has everything that 99% of the people pursuing financial freedom would want. But he doesn't. When that really changed everything I had ever thought about. And so as I kind of grew from these conversations, I started designing like my life and really recognizing what I wanted to do alongside of the financial freedom journey. And so from there, I was being coached. And when we think about how did I rebuild from the experiences I had, I am a firm believer in mindset. Like firm believer, I think it changed my life. Mindset coaching, without question, turned me into a completely different person. And I don't mean mindset coaching in the form of like, hoorah, if you dream it, you can do it. It's how do you control the internal narrative during those situations? Because one of the biggest things I've realized going from W-2 to building businesses to investing is you will lose the psychological battle way before the strategy. Because when all of these things were happening to me, and then I'm getting on Instagram, I'm getting on Facebook, And people I was outperforming are going on vacations, they're buying bigger houses, and this is all the while maybe like your car breaks down, your family member gets sick, your spouse gets pregnant, your car breaks down, your lease is coming up, your assessments on your house is increased by 40%, your insurance goes up, and this all happens within a month. It's what is the internal narrative at that point in time? And can you break through that threshold to set the tone for the rest of your experiences? And I don't think without the mindset coaching aspect, I would have been able to get through all that. And it's funny when we talked about in the green room, you mentioned something about like feeling paralyzed. And I actually said that to my coach when I was talking about this individual. They actually have a hold on me. Is I'm in this deal and he's like, don't ever say that again. You're literally not paralyzed. Don't use that phrase. Don't like you're not paralyzed. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's a good point. And so that is what led to actually what got me through that process is the community, the coaching, and then always staying in alignment with I don't see a version of this life where I'm not on top. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I kind of wanted to actually bring that up with you. It's funny in your last podcast with Troy, you talked a lot about it was a super vulnerable statement where it's like you could go back to a job, right? You could potentially go back to that. But I would almost challenge that point because your version of a job is completely different. Is you don't think that there's a world where you can go out and get a consulting gig for a short period of time or reach out to the 5,000 people in your community to have that bridge income while you continue to pursue you dream about. And that's what became of this. And so as I was going through that sales process, that coaching sales, I was also taking on additional clients. And one of the clients that I had was it was an agency, they're called GenRev, and what they do is they provide accredited investor lead gen. And so GPs or their digital marketing company really niche down to generating leads for GPs. And so I'd find myself talking to multiple GPs at a time, maybe like 10 self-storage syndications in a week. And then I quickly realized like I have no idea how to differentiate between these guys. And I was like, this is something I'm interested in pursuing at some point but every single piece of collateral when I like due diligence, like this is how you evaluate a syndication, was written by a GP. And then at the same time, I was engaging with sponsors that also had coaching programs and their assets were underperforming their coaching results. And so it's something's kind of weird here. And then I talked to another individual where he spent 13 years in prison for wire fraud and he is now coaching. And so I'm going through this process and I'm like, I want to eventually become an LP and I don't know how I can't be trusted on my own to make these decisions. I know that very easily, but there's nowhere out there that helps me evaluate outside the influence of media that's literally incentivized for you to click on a clickbait title or the sponsor. And so in my job at Gartner, we actually had a company that was a like a software review site where same way we built what Invest Clearly based off that model where effectively there is reviews by users on a third party platform that has no influence by the vendor for people to read reviews, understand experiences, and then help with their evaluation process outside the influence of paid media or the vendor. And that's how we ended up where we are today. Long story there. But that, and I could get into more about what the site is and stuff, but I'll pause because I've definitely been rambling here.
Okay, there's a lot more to that story. I feel like what you mentioned about the opportunity that was crumbling in front of you and again, like you made another big pivot into the coaching sales world and all there's so much there that I want to ask you about. So I want to ask you about your sales career and I want to talk about this opportunity that kind of crumbled and what can you tell us a little bit more about that first and then we'll talk about what came next?
Yeah. So in terms of, I guess I could start from let me start from the beginning. So biggest thing for me is I didn't know I had no idea how commercial real estate worked. I had bought small multifamily properties and well, one at that point in time, I had only studied small multifamily and I had no clue how different it was to buy. I had no idea how commercial properties were valued. I had no idea the different types of leases. It was just like a whole new world for me. And I jumped into it, right? Just went for it. And to kind of unpack a little bit more, and let me think of the order of way which to say this, but one thing that I didn't mention before is that the individual that I got involved with was quickly becoming a personality in the space, was quickly becoming an influencer in the space, had name recognition by a lot of the media outlets most people that listen to here recognize, and actually did this to about 60 other people. And so, like, my villain origin story is for what is becoming of this website is especially when you think of inexperience having a stronghold on you, is I was able to tell my inner circle this. I was able to tell people that were very close to me, but I didn't, there was only so many people that if I had a wider ability to reach people or even took that initiative, honestly, that's something that I kind of blame myself for as well. Could I have prevented catastrophe and bankruptcies and things like that? Because it was crazy as it unraveled. So there was
But
actually,
there are libel things hanging over us until there's been an investigation.
yeah,
We don't know what we can say and what we can't say, and we're very concerned about libel and getting too deeply involved there
yeah.
and doing things without an attorney's advice. And so I recognize the conflict that you're having, but at the same time, I just want to say when if you had an attorney at that point, he would have told you just let's just we gotta be
Oh,
quiet
yeah.
and we gotta participate in the investigation. Yet we're racked with guilt over the people that are still being victimized during this period of not gag order, but kind of this period of we gotta see what's going on. So there's an amount of forgiveness that goes on with this healing process that I think that's a big part of it is when you know what's going on and you don't speak out, you don't say anything.
Yeah.
I don't think that we can blame ourselves for that period of time, even though it's pretty devastating.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and just so you know, that is exactly what when I did retain an attorney, exactly what the attorney said to me. He'd probably have a panic attack if he knew I was talking about it even objectively here. But it was wild. I mean, my wife at the time, I think she was either 8 or 9 months pregnant, and the FBI was knocking on my door. I wasn't home at the time. I was in Connecticut when my buddy was at my house down in Florida, and that was exactly when I reached out to an attorney. I was like, "Okay, this is nuts." Number 1. And then number 2, the attorney was like, "Well, good thing you called me because the habits of the FBI is they'll come to your house at 5 o'clock in the morning and knock on the door. That's what
Mhm.
they're gonna do." That was just a crazy process, and, I mean, I'm still, I would say there's still things that are like I'm feeling the effects of for sure in terms of I'll give you an example. I have one deal that I literally can't get rid of. And at the time, when you think about me not knowing much about commercial real estate, and what the hardest thing I think right now in the journey is like separating what I know now and what I knew then. And like you recognize like what were you thinking? Like you should have put this in front of other people. What was wild was like this guy was the one that other people that I knew were looking up to. And so there was probably like this confirmation bias where it was like, I should have done a lot more rather than, hey, I'm like a little dog and I got excited and just kind of jumped into it. But there's a land lease on this property. And so I own a commercial property that's like, it's a hot property. It's this industrial warehouse that people would just gobble up at for any reason whatsoever. There's a land lease on it and it's on airport property. And what's insane is that the FAA recently passed a ruling that they will not extend land leases. So no one wants to buy this thing because it has a short land lease on it. And then when I talked to the airport, they told me that the cost of their attorney to write up the documents to extend it up to the minimum point the FAA will allow is not worth it. So it's like, all right, well, you're positioning to take this from me. That's probably what's going to happen if you won't even suggest for me to pay. And so it's like, all right, well, what's going to happen with that? So that's sort of that journey in a nutshell where I'm at right now.
It's just a fraught story. I mean, when the FBI gets involved, just so the listener knows, is when there's so much money that's been stolen that it goes beyond a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation and it becomes a federal criminal investigation.
Mhm.
And that's the difference between the SEC getting involved and the FBI getting involved. And that's for like big boy fraud. That's not for somebody who raised money by saying the wrong things and they didn't really know it was wrong or they didn't consult the right attorney. You get an injunction slapped on you, but FBI is where things go criminal and people start it's a very serious thing. And so to have that element brought into it. I mean, because I know people who've been subject of SEC investigation. One example I can talk about that's already over and done with is some falsified appraisals. And so all the realtors who were working for that broker were investigated
Interesting.
alongside the original broker who was committing the fraud because they had to find out which of the realtors in the brokerage were in on it. Same deal. People start showing up at the door and knocking, and people are scared because they know they didn't do anything wrong, but they're kind of wondering, what did I do wrong that I didn't even know was wrong? And it's psychologically very traumatizing, even for people who where it ended up being exonerated. Same thing with a friend of ours who committed an egregious Ponzi scheme, and everybody who worked for him, because we knew most of the people who worked for him, were investigated right alongside. And I think everybody was exonerated except for the owner of the company who did a lot of prison time.
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of feeling when you're under investigation that I don't think I did anything wrong, but I may not know I did anything wrong. And the trauma from that is pretty powerful. And I think that it's even a different type of trauma than if you had money stolen, you got a lemon of a property that you can't do anything with, and all of these other traumas. And then you stack that on top because you worked for them. And then my friends that were under investigation during the period of that Ponzi scheme, it shook up our whole friend group. I wasn't even invested in the company. I declined for reasons I can't quite really explain. I just didn't feel comfortable. And so watching that friend group get shaken up, and we still talk about it when we get together. It was a very scarring experience for all of us, and even me who didn't even get involved. And so, can you talk a little bit about the nexus of these events and your willingness to forgive yourself, to heal, to keep moving forward? Because what ended up coming out of that was Go Invest Clearly. And even the name of the company really implies a background
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
So can you take us down that road to how Go Invest Clearly was born? And then I do want to kind of circle back to the sales psychology of it as
Sure.
well, because I think that's a huge part of what you mentioned at the beginning, where you say yes and you get excited and like the excited puppy. I want to really dive into that because I think that this is a thing for most investors who are either dealing with too excited puppy or too scared to take action and
Yeah.
somewhere along there. So take us to the birth of Go Invest Clearly, and then we'll come back around to some psychology stuff.
Yeah, so the real, like, birth of it was when I was doing sales for that marketing agency for GenRep.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
at the same time, I mean, I had recovered, right? I had, well, to a certain relative recovery where I'm now at
Yeah,
a point where I was
you're
like, well,
functioning.
yeah, yeah, maybe I
Yeah,
should start considering investing in syndications. And I was talking to these sponsors, and I realized that there was nowhere in existence that had all of them in one place where I could make comparisons. I would read about them on forums. I would very, very fragmented. There are other communities that you can join that it would just be people with specific experiences and very small
mhm.
amount. And then again, I was like, well, where are all of the deals that they're doing, and how do I compare the deals against each other to then compare the sponsor? And then I was like, well, how do I actually learn about these guys outside of the influence of them or like the real
Yeah,
deal who's, like I said, they're paid on clicks. And so we started putting together this model. All right. And then, sorry, second part is I started talking to other LPs. And I was like, hey, how do you evaluate GPs? Where do you find them? Like, how are you going about this? And I would keep getting the same response. It was like, oh, I'd find people I would know and trust. And I was like, all right, well, what does that mean? And then they would list off 3 of the most familiar influencers out there. I was like, "Well, what do you know about them? Why do you trust them? Well, they've written books and podcasts and this and that." And I was like, "All right, well, I just went down that path and I got fleeced, so maybe not the best basis of trust." On the other hand,
yep,
like, o other people would tell me that they didn't invest with those guys because they weren't sure, they are influencers. So I was like, "Okay, well, what are the top 5 steps that I take when I'm evaluating a syndication?" Okay, well, here is a checklist of things to ask a GP written by the GP. So I was like, oh man, like that doesn't help me at all. And so that that led to this. And then so like my background, as I mentioned, is in like the you could call it like business consulting, like software consulting. We used to do this for, hey, if you don't know what CRM to purchase, you go online and there are 2 or 3 like software review websites that the way
mhm.
their business model is set up, it's pretty sound and you're getting unbiased, objective, uninfluenced feedback. And then you start thinking about the last 27,000 Amazon purchases you made and you read reviews on all of them. And then
Yeah,
you think about every restaurant you've ever been to and you read reviews on them or every home service contractor you've ever
yes.
hired, you read reviews on them. So I was like, why doesn't it exist? Like, why doesn't
There's no
this
Yelp
exist?
for syndication.
Yeah,
I
there's no
Yelp a restaurant, but there's no Yelp for
yeah,
syndicators.
yeah, yeah. So you have people that like they're reading reviews on $3 shampoo, but not on the $100,000 liquid investment they're making on someone they've only read blog posts on. So I was like, well, you know what? Let's build this. So that was where the inception of all of this came from. And then it was really led, the actual features was led by all of the interviews I was having with everybody else.
Okay, this is when you see somebody doing a consolidation product or one-stop shop type of product, where you can go to one space and just get all of the details, it removes a barrier for people. And I'll give you an example. I used to teach online courses for graphic design, and I would just go scour the internet for Photoshop tutorials
Mhm.
and learn how to do the things in Photoshop. And then I would decide which of these techniques I wanted to bring into my courses. And once I told my students, I said, I feel bad charging for this information because you could all go out on the internet and just read the same tutorials that I'm using to create these lessons.
Yeah.
And they said, the fact that you are taking time to go scour the internet and consolidate these resources into a course that I can follow in an easy 4-week format, that's what we're paying for.
Yeah.
We know everything is for free on the
Yeah.
internet,
Yeah.
but we want it packaged and delivered to us in a way that's going to save us a lot of time. I thought, oh, time. I'm selling time savings here,
Yeah.
not the Photoshop tutorial. And so you're doing something kind of similar with Go Invest Clearly, where people have a repository where they can go in and get a slew of information on a wide variety of people and do kind of like the almost like the checkbox feature comparison that you'd see on software websites.
Yeah, and the secondary aspect of it is, like, how do people that's the secondary aspect of it, but then you also think of we're kind of, like, flipping the journey, I would say, of the LP, because right now,
Mhm.
LPs meet, learn about, read about GPs, and then wait for a deal to come and then evaluate the deals. With our
Mhm.
site, we sort of flip that journey where now you can go filter all the deals available by your desired criteria, and then evaluate the GP after that. And so it's
Mhm.
almost like rather than it's sort of like a multi-pronged approach there. We are still working on that whole deal repository aspect. It turned out to be a lot heavier lift than we imagined, but it's gonna be
Marketing.
good. Yeah, 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 a lot. We have 160,000 deals in our background right now that we're going through and cleaning and stuff. So it's a work in progress.
Wow. Okay. So I recognize the vastness of what you're doing here. But one question that always jumps to mind when we talk about this is deals that can be shared publicly are for accredited investors only. But there are two other kinds of deals that unaccredited investors can invest in. Our fund is accredited investors only. And people ask us all the time, they're like, oh, can I invest in your fund or into your deal? And we say, yeah, if you're accredited. And they're like,
Mhm.
I don't even know what that is, first of all. And when we dive into it, turns out some of them are not accredited. And so I don't have anywhere to send them really for a place to say, okay, you can invest in a private deal that cannot be advertised, or you can invest in a crowd fund that can be advertised and it can take both accredited and unaccredited. So, how do you handle that when you're showing deals on your website that may be a 506B, which is private,
Mhm.
or a crowd fund, which is a different regulation? It's not under 506, it's a regulation crowd fund. So, how do you handle those two things for unaccredited investors?
Yeah. So before I dive into this, we have an SEC attorney on retainer. They've spoken to the SEC. We're really engaged with them. So with the 506B deals, we are actually not we can't advertise active deals. You can't even really give off the whiff that there's any sort of solicitation. And so, but
Yep.
you can do is historical performance. And so
Okay.
we will host deals on profiles that are 12 months older or closed.
Okay.
So if they're closed, not active, you can, I mean, it's the same thing as if you were to go to an event, right? I don't want to say advertising, you are essentially representing yourself at the company level rather than the deal
Hmm.
level. And then your call to action is whatever it may be, reach out to us to discuss your investing goals. The
Hmm.
506C deals we're pulling over and hosting. That's really the way we're dealing with it is that we've actually considered not pulling any 506B historical deals, but there's really nothing preventing us from doing that. And we do want the ability. So the goal of the website is to have everything here all at once, right? Good and bad. And so the reason why we're automating the deal process is because we want bad deals to also be attached to profiles. And so if someone has had a bad experience with a deal, you really don't have the decision of, hey, I'm not going to put this on. It's hey, it's connected to your profile. This is where it exists, and then people can. And so that's how we're managing that.
Okay. Do you share any crowdfunding options at this point?
Not right now. So right now, it's really mainly 506 like Reg D 506Cs and then 506B companies. We have well, okay, let me tell you why we don't show the crowdfunding stuff is because we are not you can't invest through us. So the way we have this set
Mhm.
up, we're not registered broker dealers. We are completely out of the deal. And the reason why
Mhm.
we've structured it that way is so we do retain the trust of the LP. We don't want any you cannot invest through us. We're not commissioned by dollars raised. We're not broker dealers. So whether or not an LP invests with a GP doesn't really matter to us. And so that allows us to, like I said, build that community of LPs where like they know we are not incentivized to show one thing over another based on compensation, which would be like, hey, if we don't want to, there are other communities out there that do the tribe best model where it's like, hey, we're going to pool all our money together. We got the best terms on that. So, well, are they actually the best indication for you? Did you get an extra half a point by this individual? And so
Mhm.
we don't do any of the crowdfunding things.
Okay. I think it's a great place for people to go to find operators that they can interview. And so I do love the model of the past performance because you are, as a private deal offer, 506B deal offer, you are allowed to talk about what your company does
Mhm.
and you are allowed to invite people to develop a relationship. You just can't talk about any particular deals till they're old. And there are even rules about how much we can share about old deals. And so I talk a lot about transparency with an operator. And it's one of the reasons that I talk about frauds and scams and losing money on this, on my show and on my social media platforms, because I am trying to build an atmosphere of transparency and shared experience for people to recognize, like, hey, this is out there. This can happen. If you're an eager puppy, be careful. Right. But then to also talk about healing and forgiveness, because I think when I thought I was involved in a Ponzi scheme, I called my financial advisor. He's a registered investment advisor. And I said, what do I do to get this money back? He didn't really have any advice for how to get the money back.
Yeah.
What he did give me advice on was don't let this sour you. Don't let this make you bitter because the opportunity cost of feeling scammed and then feeling like I can never invest safely again because I don't trust my own judgment. He said that will cost you more money than
Yeah.
any money you might lose to this guy. I ended up getting the money back, but it was a very important lesson during that kind of I don't know kind of period if I'm going to get the money back that I had to say, even if I lose this money, I have to forgive myself. I went into this with my eyes open. I felt like he might not be delivering on what he was going to say, and I took a chance on him anyway. And I knew that going into it, and being able to deep breath and forgive myself was very important. So that was an extremely important lesson that I learned early on in my first kind of like, I might lose a lot of money on this thing. How have you gone through that period of forgiving yourself and being able to move on and not have an added opportunity
Yeah.
cost to the experience itself?
Yeah, well, I think it's the recognition that there's a level of forgiveness, but there's also a level of accountability where
Mhm.
in that moment, it wasn't the industry, it wasn't the asset class, it wasn't anything else. Like, it was me in that moment, whether or not I was the victim, like the whole situation, it was me. And so, like, I knew that the investing in the entrepreneurial journey was still right for me and real estate was the right
Mhm.
place to be. I just screwed up. Like, I didn't do it right. It's not indicative of
Mhm.
what I'm gonna do next. And again, like, I'll stress this, I stressed it earlier, like, I did have coaching through this. Like, I had coaching 'cause it's really there are the psychological aspect of all of this will get you way before the strategy, and I knew it wasn't the strategy. And so what was my
Yeah.
option? In that moment, what was my option is, am I gonna stop and go back to the life that I was in before where I was working that I wanted to get out of because I made a mistake, or am I gonna just do it again? It was just as simple as that, is just recognize that situation for what it was. It is part of your unique path of what's coming next. It's so crazy to think about because what I'm doing with Invest Clearly now never would have happened, and I would never have the conviction if I wouldn't have went through what I went through. And let me say this, Emma, like this kind of
Exactly.
ties into what we were just talking about is our goal with Invest Clearly is not to be like the reaper, right? Like our value prop very, very directly aligns to the GP and we want the good GPs to rise to the top. That's part of what we're doing. It's not all about like avoiding the catastrophe, but like aligning yourself to the right people for you based on your goals, based on their performance, based on others' experiences, and then highlighting and
Mm.
standardizing the process. Like that's the big thing for us too, because that's what I wanted is, okay, I've done enough like investing with the wrong, like that where are the good ones?
We're the good ones. I know there are
Yeah.
good ones out there. Let's find
Yeah.
them. Yeah, I love that optimistic take on it because it's very easy to become embittered and self-critical and insecure about your decision-making process, but you've shown that power of optimism to have risen out of that experience and I'll say, I just want to make sure bad operators are not people aren't investing in them. No, you're saying I want to make sure that the good operators are the ones that are drawing the attention, not the salaciousness of the bad operators or people who've lost money or stolen money or whatever. I want to highlight the people who are doing this right. And so people can figure out who to invest with and feel safe because you want people to continue investing and not be scared. So part of that transparency for me, I always am revealing our revenue model because I feel like people who know how we make money what our motivations are, and one of them is making money. We have other motivations too to serve the community and all that, but that's all well and good. But you can really diminish that message if you don't reveal the revenue model. And so I think that was one thing with when you and I first met. I was like, explain to me how Go Invest clearly makes money or what the intended revenue new model is, because that really helps me understand a company. So can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll tell you the way we don't make money. So
Yeah.
the goal for Invest Clearly is every single sponsor, every single deal, regardless of the sponsor's participation. And the sponsors have three different profile options. And so we don't sell leads. We don't sell, I mean, there's no way to invest through us, as I mentioned. So we're not financially compensated by making an actual investment. And so the sponsors, we really give them three profile options. First profile is completely unclaimed, meaning it's how most exist on our website right now, meaning I get on the phone with the sponsor, tell them about this. They never want to talk to me. Well, their profile will still exist on the website and people can still review them. And then we have an
Mhm.
option to claim profile. What the claiming profile does is allows the sponsor to have an admin portal where they can log in and update information that I may not have been able to find publicly. For example, there's a
Mhm.
lot of lack of standardization around assets under management versus number of square footage versus doors, like how people measure what they have. So they could go in and update that. They could update their bio. And then the third option is how we make money, which is going to be profile upgrades. Now, profile upgrades does not help people rank above anybody else.
Mhm.
There's no sort of promotional aspect. They're able to add additional calls to action on their profile where you can book calls directly with their IR team bios. And so we don't even have the monetization aspect fully baked out yet. We're strictly focusing on building the community right now. But what we're going to give people is those profile upgrades, which will include, hey, you can add an additional media, maybe like a video of your team or your team members, links to your social profile. We will add like backlinks for reviews where you can host it to your website. All of these things that will never influence their placement and then will never influence their reviews. They cannot change reviews, nothing can happen. And the reason for this, and so we directly modeled this off of other software vendor companies. And so what we're able to provide the GP is number one, if you lead with transparency, if you're collecting testimonials, this is how you grow by word of mouth at scale. You can leverage these reviews in your conversation with your IR team. And you can send people who are uncertain if they want to invest with you or one of your quote unquote competitors. Hey, go look at the 25 uninfluenced, objective, unbiased reviews on Invest Clearly and then make your decision. Well, the goal of the upgraded profile is how do we prevent LPs from going to a million other places for information on you? And when that happens, they'll be more likely to engage with you. So, like, lead with transparency, you'll likely win the LP. And so when I was at my W-2, there was something insane stat where 80% of the buying cycle happens outside of the conversation with the company. So if you think only 20, think about this like 20%, you have access to 20% of their attention when it comes to evaluating you versus your competition. If they're considering 5 other companies, like your piece of the pie gets cut in half. You've got to get it right the first time. And what a better resource to build trust in a time of just wild uncertainty than being able to point to something outside of your influence for them to help with their evaluation. And so on top of that, we also are offering like analytics to GPs, which is like super critical. If you think about it, is okay, the 60% of the LPs that have favorited your profile are based in the Austin, Texas metro. Maybe you should go to market strategy, a pop up, a webinar dedicated to those people. Or, hey, of all of the thousands of reviews we've analyzed, this is the narrative around pref equity. This is how you should potentially structure your next deal. Or, hey, this is the profile page that LPs are clicking on after yours. This is how much time they're spending on your page. This is what's downloaded the most by our LPs before clicking. This is why people aren't clicking on booking a call. It really helps with that. I don't want to say top of the funnel, but it's yeah, a little bit like it, but mostly your conversion is like, how can we support you at the IR level? Because there's so many resources out there for lead gen. There's not a lot for converting post conversation. And so
Yeah.
that's the way we're structuring it right now.
It's a win-win scenario because limited partners who are saving time by being able to go to a one-stop shop repository of places and being able to get as much information as possible. So even on the unclaimed one, they're going to have business names and things like that. They can find a website, do some more due diligence. But
Yep.
on the upgraded ones, you could have offering documents there, marketing materials, like you said, interviews, and a way for people to really get to know that person. as a win for sponsors because it's giving them face time with potential investors in a way that they can do in their own privacy. Like you said, 80% of that takes outside of that conversation. And it's the same for me when I'm contemplating a large purchase or a large investment. My husband and I spend a lot of time talking about it and doing
Yeah.
research on it outside of the conversation with the person who might be the head of the company selling the product or the person who's offering the investment. Most of that does occur outside of it. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when you described yourself earlier on that you get very excited, and
Oh,
if there's
jeez.
somebody who's gonna sell you something, you're gonna say yes. I'm the exact opposite of
Yeah.
that. That I don't remember who, maybe it was Adam Boyd who posted about this on LinkedIn recently. He was talking about kids who know which parent is gonna say yes and which parent is gonna say no. So, for example, if my kids want a popsicle, don't ask mom. We don't do sugar, right? So they'll ask dad and he'll take them off to ice cream. But if they wanna learn how to drive, don't ask dad because he ain't driving my car, but I'm like, "Yeah, get in the car, let's go for a ride." So
Yeah.
they know which parent to go to get what they want. And for people who are in sales, figure out who's the no person and don't waste your time with that lead. I am the no person. I don't buy anything. I have started telling salespeople, like, "Literally, I am wasting your time. I
Yeah.
never, ever, ever buy anything." And if I do, it's almost completely independent of the interaction with the salesperson. And so that's me on the way other side. I find that being slightly negative, I'm not that great at sales. I'm slightly negative. I kind of slightly try to talk people out of things
Yeah.
because I really want to make sure when they get to the end of their decision funnel that they're sure that this is what they want. Do you need to talk to your spouse? Do you
Mhm.
need to talk to your financial advisor? Do you need to go over your finances? Have you created a budget yet? I'm like making them jump through the hoops to get to the end of this thing. I'm definitely trying to learn how to capitalize on that pessimism
Yeah.
so that I can say, this is actually a superpower, not a negative. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that personality style who's excited and jumps into things? Because I'm the kind of person who's learn all you can and at 80/20 jump in.
Yeah.
And where do you put yourself on that spectrum? And how do you use that as a superpower without it letting it also be your kryptonite?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, those are incredible sales qualities. There's so many people that don't ask those questions and then get hyped up about the opportunity in front of them. Couple different things. I think in terms of taking action, without question, that is my superpower. I think I have the ability to become very convicted of something very, very quickly, and the ability to act on that I think is unmatched. Now, the way it doesn't get in my way, I have an incredible team around me. I have a chief strategy officer that says no to me 1,000 times a day.
Figured
And
that's
yeah,
me.
yeah, that's like the best thing ever is one person may give like an inkling of a potential feature. And I'm like, hey, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. He's like, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that yet. Let's kind of push it down the map.
Focus, Pat. Let's focus.
Yeah, like our ClickUp task list, if one day it goes from here and then everything gets deleted. And so
Yeah.
that's my big thing is I've now I surround myself with good people. And that's what this is too. If you think about it, it's like, how do you surround yourself with good people at scale? And that's what we're trying to create here. But me personally is it's definitely those relationships. Like everyone, you gotta have that network. You have to have that network, whether it be someone you trust on an advisory standpoint or someone that knows you enough to know when to let you run or when to reel you back in, and I've luckily got those people around me.
Oh, I feel the same way about scaling because I don't wanna scale. I don't wanna run a large business, and it's not because I'm being too cautious, actually, it's because I don't wanna do the work
Yeah,
that's
yeah, right?
required to
Yeah, I'm
scale a
with you.
business.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. Even in my personal investing, we just looked at, like, a stretch of small multifamily properties that had a marina on it, and we're like, "Do we wanna own a marina?" "Yeah, yeah, you could put an operator involved." I don't wanna, like,
Yeah, so I hooked up with my partner who he wants to scale huge. He's an enterprise guy, and we're the startup people.
yeah,
And so I said, my husband and I, we know how to start businesses. We've started a lot of tech startups and been early stage startup for quite a number of things and early stage investors and startups. So we know how to do that, right? We know how to wear all the hats and do all the things, and you do the thing that you hate because you can't afford to hire anybody yet,
yeah,
that phase of startup, right? And he's, "No, this is like a billion-dollar kinda enterprise thing," and I have all the staff and all the tools and all the things, and I said, "Okay, so we'll handle the startup."
yeah,
And he loves to work, like, he retired early and he's, "Okay, what's next here? What can I do?" So having people, like you said, who counterbalance your strengths and weaknesses. He's, "Let's grow this thing, let's scale this thing," and he's willing to put in the work to do that. And I'm like, this is exactly the kind of person that I've been looking for to counterbalance I love starting things, but I don't love scaling things,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, that's such an important point. And I love the comment you made earlier about using accountability and taking responsibility for your decisions as a path to forgiveness. I don't think I've ever really thought about it
Yeah.
in those terms before. Can you draw that connection for me a little bit more explicitly between forgiveness through blaming yourself?
So
Really
when
is what it is.
when I was coaching, one of the key lines is like, I take ownership of my life and everything in it. And then that's the
Yep.
good and the bad. And when you really diagnosed, it is an emotional shift when like it's easy to blame and live there.
Mhm.
And then once you recognize what actually happened and that you can change the narrative and you could change the future path, like growing becomes so much easier. And that's exactly what happened in that moment. And I'll tell you one thing, it was sort of there a lot of negative came from that experience that I had, but there was a lot of positive because when I got there and we talked about lifestyle in the green room and on here, but like when I was working for this individual for the short period of time and I wasn't a true employee, I was a 1099 contractor, his life was real estate. I've never seen anything
Mm.
but he's so dedicated to one thing. Like, again, it was fraudulent, but like never seen anybody so dedicated to one thing that like I really quickly recognized that in a small amount of time that I was going there because I wanted this guy's what he's built. That's what I wanted my future life to be. And I was like, I actually don't want this. And then, oh, what was that? I don't know why. I don't even remember why I'm going down this path, but I think it's like the whole. I have no idea why I brought that up. It was something. What I was trying to recognize is a lot of bad came from that. When we diagnosed the narrative, is oh, that's what it was. When I
Mhm.
diagnosed the narrative of that experience, I very quickly realized what I didn't want my life to be. Up until that point, I want a ton of assets. I want a ton of real estate. I'm going to dedicate everything to it, and then I actually see what that looks like. It kind of seems like it
Yeah.
sucks. I don't want that. I've been away from my fiance in pursuit of this dream, but it just seems cool. But I'm not the kind of guy that wants to honestly to live like that. I just don't. I'm again too excitable to where I don't want to lower everything to the point of nothing to achieve this. And then you have it, and then what?
Mhm.
So yeah.
It's so reflective of some of the things that I've seen and noticed and heard and a lot of the decisions that we've made in our own lives. It's you really have to think about lifestyle. And I heard, I think it was Daniel Priestley talking about, do you want to start a business to scale or do you want to start a lifestyle
Yeah.
business? And he kind of made it sound like those were two different paths that you had to choose between. The lifestyle business meaning we're not going to scale this big. We're going to just kind of take it at an easy pace. I want to something that can earn me some money but still afford me the lifestyle that I want to lead versus scaling where it's just everything full steam ahead, 100% of your time, focus, and attention. And I remember watching him talk about this, and I was like, do we have to choose?
Yeah.
Do I want to be an active investor? Do I want to be a passive investor? I'm like, how about a little of both,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Own some rentals, maybe buy an apartment building with some partners, and then passively invest. It doesn't have to be this fork in the road, as so many people think about it. So I feel like scaling and lifestyle business aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. And so what you're describing there, like you're building a business, you have big scaling ideas, but at the same time, you're talking about this lifestyle is important to me. So let's dive into that
Yeah.
a little bit. Can you describe to me what you look like in 10 years? Where's your lifestyle headed? And what steps are you taking now to match up your current self with your future self?
Yeah, that's fantastic and a very heavy question in a good way. I think about it a lot. And what's most important to me, I've gone through both phases of my short life where it was like all business or it was like all lifestyle. And we think about your comment to lifestyle versus scale. There was a point in time before we had my son, me and my wife moved to Costa Rica for a little while. And I was lifestyle focused. I had my everything on
Yep.
automation. VAs were running like my emails. I would get on sales calls and go back to the beach and I wish I would have scaled that. I wish I would have scaled that, and I could have actually built something out of it rather than living in that short-term lifestyle, but it was cool at the time. And so that's sort of where I'm shifting to now is that building my life in a couple different ways. Like I wanna be mobile, but I don't wanna be mobile by force. And so
Mhm.
10 years from now, look, I hope I have all the money in the world. My family is the most important thing to me right now. And even today where I'm in the thick of it, I'm building this business. It's taking all of my attention. I won't miss my son's 2 hour class Mondays and Thursdays. Won't do it. I could do things after he goes to bed. I won't compromise time with my fiance because we're all building this business and working towards something now to then experience in the future. Well, why can't we experience it as we're growing? And so that's the most important thing to me in terms of, oh, I want a $50 million portfolio. I don't even think about things like that. Like I'm acquiring local small multifamily, like, as just future income. close to home, and I am focusing on something I'm extremely passionate about right now. And we talked about, like, the excitability thing. There's 50,000 other ideas that come to me any given day that I'm sure I could pursue at any point in time, but, like, I am very much when I had that mindset coach, we sort of broke down the kind of the way Pat thinks, and all he did was ask me 7 times in a row why. We talked about something, he asked me why, he
I
asked me
love
why,
that
he asked me
exercise.
why,
Mhm.
and my final, like, answer was like, "I just wanna have, like, fun." That's all I genuinely cared about. Nothing else
Me
really
too.
mattered. That was it. It is like the measurement
Yeah.
of that is so, like, subjective, but it's it. Like, I'm a firm believer that, like, I'm coming more in tune with the fact that this could all end at any point, and, like, we've got one shot at it, and is it likely that it's gonna end early? No, but, like, statistically, I guess I should say not likely, but, like, why should I delay any sort of excitement and, like, family moment in pursuit of material and income? I don't know, it's kinda like the opposite of the financial freedom and the FIRE communities things, but I tried that, and it was horrible for me. I tried the wild restrictions of expenses where you and your wife would get into a debate over a $7 sandwich in a month. It was, like, the worst thing that I ever experienced. I'm a pretty abundant guy when it comes to, like, life and experiences, and that's just how I have to live, and, like, I'm building the things around me to make that extend for a long time. That's, I guess, where I see myself in
Mm.
10 years.
Yeah, and I read articles right now, like, the fire movement is dead, and I feel our fire movement is beans and rice, scorched earth, and for me, fire movement is about really examining the big
Yeah,
expenses, the housing, transportation, and food, and if you can get those 3 things reduced drastically, then I can go out to a restaurant on at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon with my husband, who doesn't have a job either, and take our kids with us and drop $100
yeah,
on eating out because we feel like it, because
mhm,
our housing expenses, our transportation expenses are so low, and we keep our food expenses pretty low that we're not sweating the $7
yeah,
sandwich,
yeah,
right? And for me, that moves the needle way more than stressing over your Starbucks habit,
yeah,
because I feel like that's completely missing the point. Let's focus on the large expenses, get those down, and then live a little,
yeah,
have some fun, take your kid to a movie. And so I don't feel bad about taking us to a movie and spending $50 on 2 tickets and a popcorn,
yeah,
because I know that we're not spending too much
sure,
on some of these other big expenses. So that's how we make it through, and I think that's how you can enjoy, the FIRE process. And some people look at the way that we're living, and there's like absolutely outright reject it.
yeah,
But you said that you're working towards being more location independent, and you're having to examine some of we call them sacred cows, like Garrett Gunderson's book. You're having to examine some of the sacred cows, where you're living and how your kids are going to be educated, because you can't really be a slow traveler nomad or world schooler if your kid's in school.
yeah,
So can you tell me a little bit more about those travel plans, what that looks like, and kind of the things you're having to examine to make that happen?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's the so my son is 1 years old, and we're a little ways away from it, but all me and my wife talk about is what we're gonna do with schooling, and it's that reason. Is well, it's a multi-pronged reason, right? I mean, there's a narrative about traditional education right now that is it's negative, but for us, it's like we do want to travel, and we do think experiences is are way more valuable than sitting in a classroom for 8 hours and being judged on a handful of subjects you have no interest in. And we're designing, I would say we're starting to design life around that. And you know what was crazy is like COVID again, you want to talk about a narrative, redesigning a narrative. COVID showed that to us. I was working from home. We were in Costa Rica. We did this, we did that. And I was like, well, why haven't we been this and why don't we continue to do this? And so
Yeah.
I used to travel a lot. And when our son came, we hadn't traveled as much. And so it's like, well, we're now going to get to the point where we want to experience things with him. And how do we do that if once, twice a year, or do we wanna actually just kinda go for it when we want to, and what does life have to look like in order to do that? So the homeschool thing is something we're considering, and what's cool is there's so many resources out there and so many communities out there where conversation around homeschooling today is so different than it was if when I was growing up. It was
Yeah.
such a rarity, and now every community I join, the majority of these investors and entrepreneurs are some are
Scholars.
homeschooling, and there's, like, cohorts, and there's I was talking to
Distance learning and
yeah, I
sorry,
can't remember
keep
who it
going.
was. I was at the Bigger Pockets conference, I think it was Heather Blankenship, and
Mhm.
she was talking about one of the programs she uses where her daughter gets on the phone reads to someone who's part of the program, and it is documented as this is the level of which they're reading at if they do want to pursue traditional education down the road to college, high school. Like, that's so cool. You can do that anywhere. And that was a big concern for us is me and my wife are not academics or not
Yeah.
at all, but my wife went to culinary school and did terrible growing up in school and is great at what she did when she was actually found the trade school. But like, why do you have to go
Mhm.
through all those years of frustrations to find your genius? And so that's sort of how we're thinking is like the life that we're designing for us also have to design for a future family. And what does that look like? And how do we get there? And it's a, there's always a counter argument for every thought we have, but it's something we're trying to figure out and definitely leaning towards the homeschool, world school side of things.
A book that I read when my kids were really little that was incredibly helpful to me, this is before we ever started homeschooling, was called Einstein Didn't Use Flashcards. And it is a fascinating look into child development from very young ages, which is why I'm glad I read it when my kids were really little. And talking about the power of the anecdote and storytelling in education, because humans are not wired to think in a cumulative numbers type
Yeah.
of way. We're wired to think anecdotally and storytelling. And so harnessing that to teach the more abstract concepts of math and science and things like that was a fascinating look into how children learn. And I credit that book with starting the homeschool journey that we went on because it completely turned my thought about how children learn upside down. It was based solidly on research in Child
Yeah.
Development Research Lab. And I think that the homeschooling journey that we went on, because I kind of always wanted to homeschool even before I ever met my husband or got married. But as I was learning, like going down there and having things influence me to that path, homeschooling is what eventually led me to real estate investing
Yeah.
because this lifestyle of thinking outside the box and making decisions based on what was best for us and our family and modeling people who are killing it in the ways we wanted to kill it and watching what they were doing and that freedom of thought
Yeah.
and critical thinking was what made me think, "Man, just start a real estate business and retire my husband." This is a lifestyle. I was it's a lifestyle. And I'm not saying everybody has to quit their job and become a full-time real estate investor and a homeschooler, but people do have to rethink a lot of things to have financial freedom and make some tough decisions to have financial freedom. So, what are some of those tough decisions that you're facing down other than homeschooling to build the life that you want?
Yeah. Yeah. So the toughest decision is, I would say, the daily insecurity. So, like, if I had to sum up investment, financial freedom, and entrepreneurship on the one sentence, it's like daily insecurity coupled with unwavering long term certainty. Like the
Yes.
easiest thing for me to do at any point in time, with every layer of adversity I face, is to go get a job. It's so easy. It's so easy. It's so enticing where you could go back to that six figure income. I think Cody Sanchez said, if you want passive investing, go get a W-2. Like, if you want passive income, go get a W-2 because you're getting a check every week no matter what. And that's like the easiest thing that happens where I don't know if the future of anything I'm doing is certain. And I would say that is the challenge that I'm facing is like the daily insecurity. But then you have to have that conversation with yourself every day when you're doubting if you're going to make ends meet. You're doubting if you're making the right decision with for your family. You're doubting your ability or if you're whatever it is. And then just unwavering long-term certainty that like this life doesn't exist without becoming top. I don't see a future that doesn't align to everything that I'm trying to accomplish and create here. That's how I come out of it.
Oh, that's so good. And it it very succinctly describes exactly what I deal with personally. And I'm sure most of our listeners who have started down this path are just thinking that's exactly because we're certain that this is the way. We are certain because all of the wealthy, successful people who have time freedom do these things.
Yeah.
You see these patterns again and again and again, and you're going to put them into your life and copy those patterns. But on a day to day basis, we've heard so many people say, I lost everything in 2008, or I was doing real estate, but I went bankrupt and I had to rebuild. And I felt, am I going to have to go through that lose everything and rebuild phase? Am I making those decisions that are like, I'm certain that this is the path to wealth and time freedom, but I don't know how many times I'm going to have to come down into the trough of despair before I
Yeah.
can sustainably stay on top. Alex Hormozy says you only need to get rich once. and then it's a preservation game.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, I can get rich once and then I can hang on to it. I don't have to be Elon Musk who risks everything I made in PayPal to go build
Yeah,
Tesla, right? And I struggle with that big time. So I love the way that you phrased that.
yeah. Well, it's
Where did you
one I don't know. I have no idea. I just started, like, reflecting on everything that I've done. You start kind of realizing how you feel, and then, the insecurities you face on a daily basis, but then it's like, "All right, so what am I gonna do here?" Well, I'm gonna keep going, obviously, and so that's the certainty, but I firmly believe, like, one conversation changes your life. That's it. One simple conversation can change your trajectory. One phone call you make, like, someone could see this podcast and say, "Hey, I want to invest 7 figures into your business to do this." It's something you don't think of, because I think we attach ourselves so hardly to that outcome of I would talk to individuals and the mindset stuff. It was just like, I want $50 million in real estate under so it's like there's so many more leading indicators that can happen to get you there than just attaching
Mhm.
yourself to that, like, big, hairy, audacious goal that just brings heaviness. And so I remember when I was in corporate America, when I became really, really close friends with this one individual who was on my team, and I was his manager, and he had this quota, and we were midway through the year, and he was a high achiever the year before. He hit President's Club, and he hadn't sold a single deal in 6 months. And all he's trying to figure out is, like, how do I make up my quota in the next 6 months? It's like, well, stop thinking of that and just focus on closing one deal. One conversation changes your feeling, changes everything. And I used to joke around that my best day and worst day in sales were the exact same day because
Yeah.
things happen. It's so volatile, but you've got to align to that certainty that tempers your psyche, that, like, it is unwavering.
Ah, yeah. So I was giving my daughter a little bit of sales counseling recently, and I said, you actually have to have 2 sales approaches. One for the day you're in a good mood,
Yeah.
and one for the day when you're in a bad mood.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta make the depression and some of that negativity work for you because sales is volatile,
Yeah.
and you really have to be able to shift your approach depending on how you're doing that day.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to be perky when you're depressed, people see through it, you're not gonna
Oh,
sell
yeah.
anything. But if you're actually feeling perky, like, go with
Be
you gotta
perky.
go with
Yeah.
it, you gotta be authentic. So having 2 different sales personalities has really kinda helped me depending on because some days I'm on top of the world and other days I'm like, I'm a complete
Help.
failure.
Yeah. Help. Someone help.
And you can't go out and sell with a good mood, perky personality when you're having a day like that. You
Yeah.
just gotta keep it real on those
Yeah.
days,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, so good, so good. Okay, so this is usually the point in conversation where I have to wrap it up, but I don't want to because usually
Yeah.
about 45 minutes in is where we start getting, like, into the good deep stuff. That's why I've started letting the format be a little bit longer, but I'm like, "Okay, we gotta wrap it up now." So
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
How
No.
do people get a hold of you after the show? And I always ask everybody, why should people get a hold of you after the
Yeah,
show?
absolutely. So my email address is in this wonderful pop-up right here, pat@goinvestclearly.com. I'm on every single social media out there. My full name is Pasquale, so it might be under Pasquale, it might be under Pat. And yeah, I'm on my email all day long, so whatever they wanna reach me, they can.
Who's your ideal person who would reach out to you after the show? What personality type or what's your ideal client, I guess you could say that you wanna help?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think that'll split to 2. If anyone's on their financial freedom journey or pursuing entrepreneurship or investing and wants to connect and network, I'm about it. Like, I love meeting people. From, like, a business standpoint, we align very directly to LPs and GPs. And so if people want to figure out how Invest Clearly can work for them on both sides of the equation, I'm available.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've got a little similar thing here where if you want to invest in our fund as a passive limited partner, drop in, join us at partnerwithrise.com. And if you want to be a GP, we have a resource for that too. If you want to be a manager, general partner, joint venture, go to riseclubcapital.com. We have a weekly meeting that is free where you can look at real deals in real time, talk to real operators. And if you do want to do a deal, you can tribe up and pool money and go and negotiate for better terms. And so it's a kind of a gym buddy type of place. It's a great place for passive investors too, because especially like what you were saying at the beginning, where it's like, I didn't know how to analyze a deal. That's exactly what we do in this club all day long. Appreciate you so much for coming in. Please reach out after the show. We do this show so that we can network with you. I mean, as much as we get out of talking to each other, and I highly value that opportunity to just sit here and pick your brain, Pat.
Yeah,
One of the reasons we publish it is because it's a networking tool. So
sure.
please be sure that you reach out after the show, find out what we can do, what we can help. I mean, we're the kind of people who just want to teach people for free because we just like it. Just you never know where a conversation is going to go. and we need to have more conversations with people and just see where it leads. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Pat.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was a really good time.
Yeah. See y'all soon, and be sure to reach out so you can tell us about your next passive income adventure. Until next time.